morning and welcome. This is Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm your host, Udwa Kamimo. We are unfortunately going to have a discussion that seems to be a perennial one about drought. We've seen pictures of people in dire need, dry riverbeds and emaciated livestock. The situation is not a surprise, but it is worsening, with more than half the country affected. A government response is underway, sending food and water to the areas most affected. Droughts are not new to us, so how do we end the devastating consequences? Well, today's guest is the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, Willie Bett. We also have with us our regular panelists, Wutagin Jao and Charles Odhiambo, both of Royal Media Services. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
So droughts are not new. What's different about this year's situation compared to last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago?
Yes, drought, as you've said, is really not, it's becoming a common phenomenon now. Of course, the last worst drought we had was in 2011. But as you asked, the difference between now and maybe the last drought which we had is that this time round, we were more prepared than before. You will recall, Amimo, that on the onset, when we realized or when we got the early warning that the rainfall is going to be below normal, that is around August, September, October, we did preparatory meetings and put budgets in place to ensure that if the situation continues, then we would be able to respond much faster and better this time around.
So if we were so well prepared, why are we seeing these, grim pictures of people who are starving? They haven't eaten in days. The dry riverbeds, you can see them, in our background. Livestock dying, herders having to walk miles and miles, in search of pasture for their animals.
It could have been worse. The interventions which we
but shouldn't it have been better?
What we are saying is the response is better than it has ever happened in this country. Because what has happened is we anticipated, but again, what you need to understand is you cannot know the intensity because the situation changes with, immediately. The situation today, you might think the situation would require this level of intervention, only to realize that it is getting worse. And then the situation changes, like what happened now around November, December, rainfall started coming in. With the
rains came late and they ended early.
Yes, it came late, of course, and we were undertaking the interventions, only for it to end again abruptly. But because of our preparedness, what happened is we continued with our program. You remember last time when I came here, I told you the kind of interventions which we had put in place, because an interagency team came together very fast, responding to the early warning, and started preparing a CAP memo which was approved, where 21 billion Kenyan shillings were put aside. 5.4 billion was to be dispensed within 3 months. And action started immediately in November, where 1.8 billion was put in action immediately. So those interventions continued until the first phase of 5.4 is now in January, where again on Monday we reviewed the situation. And we are now upscaling the interventions because the situation keeps.
If you say that the difference this time around is in preparedness, if on a scale of 10 in previous years our preparedness was maybe 1/10, what number would you assign to our preparedness this time around?
7.
7?
Yes.
Why don't we have it at 8, 9 or even 10? Because of the evolving...
Because of the evolving situations which are changing actually within very short times. What I could give ourselves as we speak now is 7 out of 10.
So you have talked about interventions, and I've had politicians and leaders all over affected counties making serious noise. In fact, some were complaining that why should Kenyans go to Uganda to look for passed-down food? This is very embarrassing because it's a national shame.
To look for food?
Yeah, of pasture.
No. You see, when drought hits, what happens normally is it hits mostly the Asal areas. And these are the areas where livestock is the most affected.
The arid and semi-arid
areas.
The arid
and semi-arid areas. Livestock is the most affected. In the scale of the impact of drought, especially this year, livestock is the most affected, followed by water, and then now human beings and food. So when drought happens, and given the nature of the pastoral communities who are resident in these areas, in most cases they move the animals. Even when there is no drought, there is always dry spell, where they move animals from Garissa, and coastal area has always been a place where they would move the animals during the dry spell. But when there is drought and there is no vegetation even in the coastal area, what they do now is to look for any other place, often including moving to the neighboring countries. Not only Uganda, they even go to Ethiopia. But the situation this year is that it's not only affecting Kenya, even the neighboring countries are also affected. And even as they cross, they are not finding anything much. Yeah,
when you say that livestock is the most affected, what exactly do you mean? Because we've seen the pictures of livestock drying, withered, but we also hear that in terms of the value of the livestock, there's added pressure on these communities because the value of the livestock decreases, but the price of food increases. So they're caught in a bind.
This is a normal situation. In a situation like this, certain things happen. In a situation of drought, definitely, as I told you, livestock gets affected. So what happens is even the body condition of animals really deteriorate. And the value of an animal of that nature will definitely drop. Our first intervention, of which was offtake to buy these animals, initially we received the resistance from the communities.
This is destocking?
No. Buying off animals from them. Say that
is well before the situation.
That is well before the situation got worse. That was our immediate intervention. But what these communities value these animals so much, to the extent that their hope was that something would happen. Rainfall would come. And therefore they were hoping and resisting to sell the animals, hoping that some rain would come.
Change.
So in the process, the animals got worse and worse. And at some point now, by the time they were accepting to release the animals for off-take program to take place, the condition of those animals had really deteriorated, to the extent that even as we bought those animals, they were not reaching even the destinations, they were dying. But then what we immediately decided to do is to buy the animals and have it slaughtered for them to use it again as food and to improve on their nutrition.
How would you explain, given your confidence about the level of preparedness towards this, how do you explain a situation where perennial areas perennial suffering areas like Machakos and the rest, Yata and the surrounding areas, this time around have food, and other areas like Nyanza, like Kwale, Coast and the rest do not have food?
Again, it is the pattern of some precipitation of some kind. When you talk of Machakos, of course Machakos has come into the bracket as we speak now. It is part of the affected areas. But they were not affected earlier because the precipitation which had happened caused them to harvest something. In these arid areas, some small crop could facilitate some crops, especially the pulses. And when they get some stocks of the pulses, then it will push them to a level where if there is no further precipitation, then they fall into the bracket now of the deficit regions, of which Machakos now is part of it. Even Makueni now is part of the county.
Is it purely precipitation or also leadership? That certain communities are investing in drought mitigation, drought resilience, and others haven't quite?
As we speak now, agriculture and certain activities have been developed. So definitely...
But that's the point though, isn't it? Leadership.
I'm coming to that point. You would find some people are more proactive in terms of response to certain situations. Without me pointing out which county or which county, you would realize that certain counties respond earlier than others.
It's an election year, you have to be careful who you're giving kudos to.
Even including the budgets counties allocate to agriculture and also emergency situations. The national budget which is given to counties, 2% of that is actually supposed to address emergency situations. But you might realize that not all counties actually spend that money to respond. So depending on county to county responses will determine the level of impact and the level of the shock which they are able to absorb. But then national government comes in, especially when the national government will bring overwhelmed with the situation.
So being an election year, one of the things that publics in the various counties can do is, especially in the affected areas, is to audit how their governments, how their county governments
have handled
the emergency agriculture mitigation and all.
Naturally so. I would expect that.
Well,
but you see, it becomes very difficult again, because the national government intervention now does not consider whether the county is doing anything or not. We are now doing a blanket intervention in all the affected areas.
But this is
what we hope is people would know, we differentiate between what the county did and what the national government did. Most counties would write on even the activities of the national government. That's what I think.
Waziri, if I got you right, did we have enough food from the last harvest? I'm asking that in view of your comments during the All African post-harvest
last night on the news
Congress and exhibition, where you said the problem is how we take care of our food after we harvest. Did we have enough food last time?
The food which we have just harvested now, the harvest we have is generally the normal harvest. What we are facing now is that the second harvest, which is supposed to boost now our long grain harvest, is what was affected and affected big. As we speak now, we have 21 million 90 kilogram bags, which is generally what we normally receive during this period. But what we are going to see is that the short rains harvest, which normally we receive 7 million, is going to be affected big time. And the amount of maize and other food like beans, which we have now, is able to take this country to June. I know you would ask me, if we have enough food for June, why are people dying? The people are not dying because there's no food. Not people, there's nobody dying really. I mean, suffering.
Okay,
suffering. Sorry, I have to correct that. Why are people then suffering because of lack of food or hungry? The reason is not because of lack of food. It is because most people then don't have the ability to buy. Purchase. And that is why the government intervention now comes in with relief, so that that situation is mitigated. Otherwise, the food balance, what we call food balance sheet in the country, is able to take us up to June.
Okay, so just in terms, go ahead.
I have heard politicians saying that people who are waiting for relief food wait for holiday, children, mamas, and old people, and suggesting therefore that instead of getting food itself, they get cash. How feasible is that?
Yes, we are actually in discussion and we are exploring those possibilities. You know, every situation requires logistical issues. Even the distribution of food itself, you know, the whole structure is involving some logistics. And if it might not arrive on the exact time you require. But then again, we are also now exploring the option of cash transfers. Cash transfers is going on even as we speak now, but we are trying to see whether we can replace the food distribution with cash transfers, so that people, when they're empowered, then they can be able to buy. Maybe not only the maize which we are providing, they can buy what they think is better for them.
How does that work? If in our market there is no food that is being sold and you give me money, and yet I have children who are hungry, how is that going to help me? Wouldn't you rather give me food?
Let me tell you, Charles, Kenyans are very resilient. The minute there is purchasing power in any situation, you will find Kenyans taking food to that area. If there is resilience in a community, even deep in...
What are you calling resilience?
I mean the ability to take care of their livelihood.
They're versatile. They know how to capture every moment.
Yes. If they have that empowerment, if that resilience will have been built through cash transfer, what would happen therefore is businessmen would avail these commodities at their doorstep.
Isn't that better way of doing things? Because when you give food to administrators, chiefs and whoever, they steal it
and sell it.
And that has happened since I was a kid. Chiefs and DOs were selling relief food all the time. So isn't it better therefore to give the money so that businessmen can go and sell?
We are considering that very seriously. To be very honest, we are considering cash transfers very seriously. What happens though is cash transfer does not have an overnight, because the infrastructure has to be developed.
But how does it address the corruption?
And it's much better. It's much better, because for you to benefit from a cash transfer, you must have an account, you must have a card, and therefore the transfer goes directly to you. At least we'll be sure the money has reached the intended person, because there's that registration, identification of the beneficiaries, and registration.
Waziri, how do you feel as a person in charge of making sure Kenyans have food? And this I'm asking on behalf of that lady in Tiati in Baringo, who was to boil wild berries for 6 hours to depoison it before she eats it, because even children can't eat. How do you feel? Have you seen the footages?
I feel terrible, and that is why in situations like this we don't sleep.
And it doesn't happen one day, it happens a week, it happens months.
If you can see the government programs now in trying to improve food situations in the entire country, if you can see the investment in government in terms of dams, the investment in terms of desilting, building boreholes, especially in areas which are harsh climatic conditions. The high potential areas, less of a problem.
So that's
but we are focusing on Tiati, for example, where there is hardship. The kind of boreholes and the investment government is putting in these areas, unlike in the past, is really massive. And the statistics are there. The kind of budgets we are allocating now to irrigation facilities, to building boreholes, construction of dams.
That's a macro intervention. If we were to go back to Tiati and look for that woman today and say that we saw you boiling wild berries earlier in the week, have you had some food today, Wednesday? Would her answer be yes or no?
It would, if we know the intervention in terms of relief food distribution, those are the people we are targeting, and there is enough food to distribute to
but
them.
You say that you're targeting them, and so our question to you is, if your targeting is right and the distribution is working, will this woman by today have received relief food?
If, for example, there was a case where that woman had not been identified and known that there is a woman somewhere who is suffering from this, that could easily happen. But the minute we know there is a need at this particular area, that the supply is instant, and I can assure you.
I think what Udwak is asking is, we had a footage on Monday, actually on Sunday evening. Our team was there over the weekend. If we sent a team now and got that same lady, would she be having food?
Most likely she should be having food, because we have a team in Ministry of Devolution whose response, whose work is fast response to incidences where it might not be covered in the current distribution network and meet requirements. What we are realizing now, even the non-traditional areas in terms of deficit is now coming into this bracket again. And so we are looking out on those situations. We are looking out, look at even Vutalangi as we speak now, it's starting to show signs that people need to be helped in that area. And these are non-traditional areas where you need to give them food. So such cases could happen, but the minute we realize, the team at Devolution will react very fast.
So how then do you ensure that the relief distribution of food, that people are accessing this? Because you're saying that the minute you realize, you get the food there. But on balance, in terms of tracking people, in terms of ensuring that they have access to the food they need, how do you ensure, one, that you're being effective, efficient, and B, that there's some sort of accountability?
What is happening now, I know it is under the Ministry of Devolution, but the situation as a team...
But you're part of it.
Yes, I am part of the team. What is happening now is we have a structure of distribution through the county commissioners, deputy county commissioners, chiefs and assistant chiefs, to the committees at the... And at each level there is a committee. We have gone an extra mile to ensure that as we pass this structure, we also inform the political wing, like a member of parliament, for example, because the interest of a member of parliament to ensure that his people actually access some of these commodities which the national government is providing. So we are trying to use that as a check mechanism. So as a provincial administration is distributing food, now we give information through written letters and also SMSs that this amount of food has been distributed to your constituency. So we believe, and I know they do, to ensure that now that food has come to my constituency, it is his responsibility also to confirm that the affected people really access this food. It's a way of, you know, human beings.
That food which you are distributing through chiefs, through the county commissioners, never gets to that woman, because that food will find it in the market being sold by businessmen.
I think that Njau is isolated cases. Let's not demonize our administration. There will always be bad elements in any situation. And we are still really human beings. Somebody normal cannot sell food going to somebody who needs it, and if he does not get it...
But that has been a habit.
So
it's not yesterday. I said since I was in school.
We've had
up to today.
Even me, I've had the same cases. But what I want to say is I think we have blown it because of isolated cases. There are cases where people do that. But by and large, the general distribution really happens. Most chiefs, assistant chiefs are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But there will be a few who would want to benefit from it.
I saw in the newspaper this morning. I saw in the newspaper that nearly 100,000 people need food.
Yeah, Kieni, as I tell you, yes. Kieni now was not part of the needy areas, but you see it has come into bracket. And we are aware of that, and food is now on its way to Kieni.
Actually, one of our viewers says there's been more rain in some of these ASAL areas than in the Mount Kenya region. We've harvested more cereals from Gashoka and none from Lower Kirinyaga. It might not be due to leadership, and that comes from Stanley. Yeah.
When you say 1.3 billion tons of food go to waste because of poor post-harvesting systems, and I'm quoting your speech yesterday, what exactly do you mean? 1.3 billion tons of food going to waste?
Sorry, Charles, let me ask you to park that question. We have to take a break shortly, but I'd like to ask you then, because we're discussing the drought and its impact.
Right.
In terms of agricultural production, where do we stand? Because you said that in some areas there's been normal output, in other areas it's just livestock production that's been affected.
Yes.
So on balance, where do we stand?
The drought, the situation of the drought as we see now is worsening. That one is a fact. And the interventions, we are now scaling up the interventions. That is it. But as we speak now, the food balance as we speak now is enough to take the country after June of this year. We are monitoring the situation. The minute we see the rains, even for the long rains, will delay, then other strategic decisions will have to be made. Because now, we will then be looking at, after June, how is the situation going to happen? Those decisions we are making as we monitor the current
then
situation.
your question comes in about the losses from storage.
The 1.3 billion tons of food going to waste?
I believe...
Where is this food from, and why is it going to waste?
Right. The situation is, in Africa and Kenya, 30% of our production goes to waste. And it is going to waste because of post-harvest handling. During harvest time, if you monitor, you will find that most of the food which is being harvested, especially even in the North Rift, during harvest time there's a lot of rainfall. Most people may be not having storage facilities.
Or poor storage facilities.
Sorry?
Because of the yeast and mold. And
yes, and so that most of it now, 30% of it goes to waste, 70% now they're able to salvage and use it for economic use. Look at the horticulture sector. Go to Marikiti as we speak now. You will see piles and piles of wasted vegetables. And the reason is the connection between the production and the market. That is one area. It is because of storage facilities. Aflatoxin, for example, now we know there is certain areas which are susceptible to aflatoxin, where when you produce food, the minute we realize it has aflatoxin, we have to destroy that. These are post-harvest losses which government is now investing heavily.
What are aflatoxins for our viewers?
Aflatoxin is
okay. My mother is a scientist. Let me give you my mother's explanation of aflatoxins.
Yes.
Aflatoxins are these toxins that are produced when grains are improperly stored, and so there is mold. And so when you consume the mold, it initiates a toxic response in the body. That's my understanding of my mother's science.
That is, and it is not only got with poor storage. It can also be implanted in the soil, so that in the same environment where you are growing your crops, it can still pick the aflatoxin, and that is why we are now investing in AfloSafe.
I'm curious about how you get mold from the soil.
Yes. That is why the toxins in the soil. Actually, the toxins remains in the soil, and that is why the AfloSafe, a chemical which we are using now, is going to replace the toxins in the soil with a less harmful toxin, so that the crop, when it grows, the toxins which it will contain will not be aflatoxin. Okay. It will be a safe toxin for human.
Okay, so we have to take a break now. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV, and we're talking about the drought and its impact with the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, Willie Bett. Drought seems to be an annual occurrence, so how do we end the devastating consequences? Our SMS number is 22422, and on Twitter, our hashtag is Cheche.